It is just before 8 in the morning on December 26, 2004, and in the coastal city of Banda Aceh, Indonesia, families are still at home because it is a Sunday. Children who would normally be in school are sitting with their parents. Fishermen who would normally be out on the water are finishing breakfast. Shops are closed. The city is quiet, unhurried, breathing at the slow pace of a holiday morning. Then the ground begins to shake, and it does not stop for nearly 10 minutes. When the shaking finally ends, no one yet knows that the Indian Ocean floor has just torn itself apart in one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in human history, and that somewhere beneath the surface of the sea, a wall of water is already moving toward the shore at the speed of a jetliner, carrying enough force to flatten a modern city in a matter of minutes. The earthquake that triggered what the world would come to call the Boxing Day tsunami measured 9.1 in magnitude and struck approximately 150 miles off the coast of northern Sumatra, about 31 miles beneath the ocean floor. The rupture along the fault boundary between the Burma tectonic plate and the Indian plate released energy that scientists later estimated was equivalent to roughly 23,000 Hiroshima-type atomic bombs. The seafloor did not just shake, it physically lurched upward in some sections and dropped in others, displacing an enormous column of ocean water in an instant and sending that displaced water racing outward in every direction simultaneously. Banda Aceh, sitting directly in the path of the nearest surge, had approximately 15 minutes from the moment the ground stopped shaking to the moment the first wave arrived at its shore. 15 minutes is not very long. It is roughly the time it takes to walk 5 or 6 city blocks, to finish a cup of tea, to have a short conversation with a neighbor about the earthquake that just rattled the windows. There was no warning siren. There was no tsunami detection system in the Indian Ocean at that time. The people who survived the initial shaking did what people naturally do after an earthquake ends. They checked on their families, stepped outside to look at the damage, and began to talk about how strong that tremor had been. A fisherman named Surya Dharma, who was out at sea when the earthquake struck, saw the water begin to behave in ways he had never seen before and made the split-second decision to steer his boat further out into deeper water rather than racing back toward shore and his family. That choice saved his life. The sea gave its own warning to those who knew how to read it. In the minutes before the first wave arrived, the water along the shoreline began to recede, pulling back from the beach with unusual speed and exposing the seabed, stranding fish in the open air, revealing a strange stretch of wet sand and rock that was normally hidden beneath the surface. Some people, particularly children, ran down to the exposed shore, curious about the fish flopping in the open, fascinated by the sudden strangeness of the beach. Some eyewitnesses who understood what a retreating sea could mean began running immediately for higher ground, screaming at others to follow. Most people did not run. They stood and watched, and by the time the first large wave appeared on the horizon, described by those who saw it as a black wall of water, a mountain moving toward the land, there was almost no time left. What arrived at the shore of Banda Aceh was not a single cresting wave the way most people picture waves. It came as a surge, a massive, relentless bore of dark water loaded with debris, pressing forward with a power that did not diminish as it hit the coast, but instead climbed. Eyewitnesses described the water level at the beachfront rising to approximately 9 meters, roughly the height of a 3-story building, and inland, where the terrain offered no resistance, the water pushed on, flowing through streets, pushing through walls, carrying with it everything it had gathered along the way. Boats, trees, vehicles, the entire physical substance of the coastal neighborhoods. Video footage recorded from upper floors and hills shows the streets of the city below filling rapidly with a churning black current, moving with a force that swept buildings off their foundations as though they had never been there. Entire neighborhoods that had existed for generations were erased in minutes. Settlements along the western coast of Aceh were struck by waves that researchers later measured at heights exceeding 50 meters in certain geography-dependent locations, making them among the tallest tsunami run-up heights ever scientifically documented. Helicopter surveys conducted in the days that followed revealed that some coastal settlements had been so completely destroyed that there was nothing left standing. No walls, no foundations visible above the mud, nothing to indicate that human beings had built lives there for centuries. Aid workers who arrived in the aftermath described seeing only flat, debris-covered ground where communities had been, punctuated here and there by isolated mosques that had remained standing when everything around them was gone. Survivors, who had sheltered inside those mosques, believed it was nothing short of extraordinary that those structures alone had survived. The human cost was staggering in ways that are genuinely difficult to hold in the mind. Approximately 228,000 people were confirmed dead or permanently missing, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters in all of recorded human history. In Banda Aceh and the surrounding Aceh province alone, over 170,000 people lost their lives. At a single mass grave in the village of Uli Lue, more than 14,000 unidentified victims were buried together because there was no other way to manage the scale of the loss. Families searched for weeks and months for people who would never be found. Researchers studying the disaster found that children, the elderly, and women had the lowest survival rates, and in some coastal villages, the number of female deaths far outnumbered male deaths, partly because many women waited at home for their husbands to return before attempting to flee. Food was scarce for the first 3 days. Electricity was gone. Roads leading out of the devastated province were blocked by debris. Children who did survive returned weeks later to find their schools destroyed and covered in mud. 4 elementary schools in some areas were merged into one because so many of their students had died. A generation of Achenese children went from ordinary Sunday mornings to carrying memories that researchers would later describe as causing measurable changes in their bodies and stress response systems that persisted more than a decade after the event.
Breaking news, a massive 8.9 magnitude earthquake has triggered a devastating tsunami along the Pacific coast. We'll have out areas with evacuation areas underway, ways of widespread destruction.
The world responded to the disaster on a scale that was itself without precedent in the modern era. An estimated $14 billion in international aid was raised, much of it donated directly by ordinary people watching the news from their living rooms on the other side of the planet. Tens of thousands of aid workers, soldiers, doctors, and volunteers poured into the region. The rebuilding that followed over the years that came after was genuine and substantial. Infrastructure was constructed to be more resilient. Early warning systems were installed along coastlines that had none. Disaster education was introduced into schools. Evacuation buildings were erected in coastal areas. The Aceh Tsunami Museum opened in 2009 in the capital, and across the region, signs were posted on streets pointing in the direction survivors should run if the sea ever retreated unexpectedly again. In the center of Banda Aceh today, a large wooden fishing boat sits several stories above street level, wedged permanently between buildings, exactly where the wave deposited it when it swept the vessel 5 kilometers inland from the port. The ocean that destroyed their city is also the ocean they still fish from, still build their lives beside, still watch every morning as the light comes up over the water. The tsunami took everything once. They know it could come again. So they built museums, and they painted arrows on the walls pointing toward high ground, and they taught their children what the retreating sea means when it pulls back from the shore and exposes the sand. And they left a boat in the middle of their city where it has no business being, so that no one who walks those streets will ever be able to forget what the water did on one quiet Sunday morning.